inviting all of us. We're going to have each panelist introduce themselves at first, and then we're going to try to cover some topics. Kind of broken it down in the war on drugs, prevention, treatment, and harm reduction. And I think there's a lot of discussion that can be had in each one of those categories. There's a lot happening right now. There's a lot of history that goes behind it. And I think it's an important discussion to have. Why is it so important to be here? Why is it so important to try to glean as much knowledge as you can out of this? Not just from the people up here, but the conversation we're going to have at the end. A few reasons. Mainly because there is a learning curve to addiction. As a parent of a young man in recovery, I want to tell you that I should have known better. A little bit on my background. I retired October 1st after a 35-year law enforcement career that included local, state, and federal assignments. And I thought I knew everything there was to know about drugs. And maybe I knew everything there was to know about drug dealing, but I certainly didn't know everything there was to know about addiction. And because of that, because of my cockiness, I overlooked a lot of signs that now in retrospect hit me in the face, or should have hit me in the face like a baseball bat. And so the more you know, the sooner you act, and the sooner you act, the less harm is done, and your chances of a successful outcome increase. So that's who I am, and we'll start all the way over to the left. And Joe, if you could give us a minute or two on you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ken. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I got involved with this because my son was also addicted. Joey was fighting addiction, and we found out, like many parents found out, you go downstairs and find many things missing that you used to have that aren't there anymore, which started us on a path to finding out about the disease. You know, again, I think it was something that we weren't paying attention to. We're parents. Over and over again, we want to make excuses for our kids, you know, in our mind of why it couldn't possibly be drugs. I mean, Joey had lost almost 40 pounds. He was a 205-pound athlete that was down to 165 pounds, and my wife and I were still claiming that it was because he had an eating disorder, or he was just trying to get in shape. But once we got to the bottom of it and found out that it was the opioids, that we decided we were going to speak out as a family. My son led that charge when we asked him to speak up at the high school, and in front of 300 former classmates and parents that all knew him as that star athlete just 2 years ago, Joey was able to go up and speak about it. And we saw the power in that. We saw the kids in the class that knew Joey crying. We saw the parents come up and give us a hug. And we knew that that was the path that we were going to take our family on. Joey was the one that started our Community Speaks Out in my eyes, and continues to push me in ways that I didn't know I was going to go. I decided to run for state rep because of the opioid crisis, because I think what I've learned through Community Speaks Out and through all the things that we've done together, I feel like I can bring a perspective up there that is going to change the way that we've been fighting it for so many years, and it's needed because, you know, my wife and I sat down shortly after Joey was addicted and wrote down 29 kids' names that I knew personally, because we both coached sports in town, and we knew a lot of people and didn't know how deep it was. And once you start committing to paper of how many folks are in trouble or struggling, you start realizing the actual problem that we have. So that's my plan. Hopefully I can help you guys speak about the legislation side today, and also my part, my personal part.
Chief?
I'm LJ Fusaro. I'm the police chief here in the town of Groton. I've been chief for about 2.5 years. Prior to that, I was with the Connecticut State Police, where I retired as a major, having commanded the most recently the Emergency Services Unit and the Office of Counterterrorism. But one of my first introductions to this new job of mine was a couple weeks before I became chief, when I attended something that Joe and others had hosted here at Fitch High School, where a chief from Gloucester, Mass. Came down to discuss some of the programs he was instituting in his police department, and how really law enforcement was looking to take a different approach to this opioid issue. I'm pretty proud of the work that our officers have done, because I think we've reshaped the way policing is done, at least in our little corner of the world, because we're not looking at just arresting people, and certainly not looking at arresting people that have problems. we're looking at trying to find the root cause, and we've taken a two-prong approach to dealing with this. One is the enforcement, and our department was leaders, and that's why Detective Emery is here, leaders in the Regional Community Enhancement Task Force, where we look at the source and we try to identify where stuff is coming from. And more importantly, we've tried to train our officers through the help of others on how to get people into recovery and help them deal with the issues that have brought them to where they are, where they're interacting with us, and try and take a different approach rather than just arresting people, sending them off to court, but really following up and trying to make some positive impact in people's lives. And I think we've been able to do that, not through our efforts, but really through the collaboration with a bunch of others.
Thank you, Chief. Christa.
Thank you. My name is Christa. A few years ago, I had been clean from alcohol for 3 years, and I thought that I'd always had problems with drinking in college, and once I had been clean for those 3 years, I thought that all of my problems were over. And I went back to school, and I got a master's degree in counseling, and I got a job in Boston at a methadone clinic. And working at a methadone clinic, I saw all of the devastation that an opiate addiction can bring to someone. I was engaging in my recovery for a bit, and then the more time that went on, the less I was putting into my own recovery and just sort of focusing on work, and life gets in the way. And I ended up spraining my finger and going to a doctor and getting a prescription for opioids. And I thought, I've been clean for 3 years. I never had a problem with these in the past. I was prescribed these by a doctor. I'm in pain. I'm gonna take these and everything will be fine. And everything was not fine, because when you struggle with an addiction, it usually is with everything and anything that is an addictive substance. So very quickly, my addiction to opioids got pretty out of control, and it, started slowly ruining everything in my life. Started, not being able to go to work, not being, hiding things from family, all the things that go along with an addiction, and all the way up until that point, before I, reached out to my family and got help and started going into treatment. I always thought that because I had those 3 years clean in the past, that when I decided that I wanted to be clean again, that I was going to be able to just accomplish it very easily. And that was part of the addiction sort of tricking me into not realizing how much of a grip it had on me. And when I did go into treatment for opiate addiction, it was a horrific battle because, number one, it's just horrific in general. It's very difficult to get off of opiates. But number two, I struggled so much with the current system, with the treatment system. I went to Suboxone clinics and detoxes and emergency rooms and 45-day treatment programs in Florida and halfway houses, and received a Vivitrol injection and was detoxed with methadone. Basically everything that you can do, I did, but none of it was cohesive. It was just sort of like each time that I would relapse, it was a Band-Aid on the problem. And when I finally was able to get clean, it was because I saw a doctor that put a cohesive treatment plan together for me. And that was the beginning of me being able to get clean. And if people have questions, we can talk more about what that path was for me. But I was able to do it, and I've been clean for just about 5 years now. So that's brought me to where I am. I don't really do counseling as much anymore because for me, that I would be worried that it would be a trap that would potentially lead me into not focusing on my own recovery again. So I engage in things like Community Speaks Out and other substance abuse prevention activities, and I do a little bit of per diem mental health stuff on the side, but this is my sort of pathway now, and I'm trying to stick to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Christa. Carolyn.
Good evening, I'm Carolyn Wilson. I am a health program coordinator at Ledgelight Health District in New London. I've been there for about 7 years. I coordinate the GASP group, which stands for Groton Alliance for Substance Abuse Prevention. That program has been around for 18 years, and we focus on adolescent substance abuse prevention across the board. I am also a board member for Community Speaks Out, and I'm very happy to be here tonight. Thank
Rob, I'm sorry, you're waiting for an invitation.
Mine will be short. My name is Rob Emery. I'm a detective with the Groton Town Police Department. I've been there 28 years. I'm from Groton. Right now, I'm part of the Regional Community Enhancement Task Force, so we focus on some of these issues here. I have a son and a daughter. One's in the Army. My daughter's a police officer in Stonington. And like everyone else, obviously, I've been professionally affected by it, but personally, addiction has affected me personally, my family, so no one's immune to it. We're all in the same boat, so anything we can do to help out or any questions I can help you with, be glad to.
Thank you, Rob. So we'll jump right into that. We'll start with the war on drugs. Past, present, and future war on drugs. And maybe it won't be called a war on drugs anymore in the future. It'll be called a war on addiction or a something different. So speaking from personal experience, I was one of those zero tolerance soldiers at one time. I'm talking about zero tolerance. I worked in a grant-funded program that we got our money based on our numbers, how many people we arrested. So I didn't care if it was a kilo or residue on somebody's license, they were going to jail. And as I sit here today looking back at that, I know that that was not the proper course to take. It was what was expected of a police department in the late 80s, early 90s when I was doing it. I think things have changed in a lot of different ways, and hopefully some of our panelists can reflect on present, and then maybe even some of the people other people in the panels on the panel here will talk about how they hope to see it in the future as well. And I forgot to say that we're holding questions to the end. At the end, we'll leave ample time for discussion and questions. That way we can keep it flowing and kind of stay on topic. So, Chief, do you want to jump right in with with that?
Yeah, well, you know, the war on this hasn't it hasn't ended. You know, we continually in law enforcement try to stem the tide of not just opioids, but all illegal substances coming into, you know, our neighborhoods. But I think that we've really tried to reshape our efforts to maybe look at some other ways to approach this. And I'll give you an example. You know, one of the things that we struggle with, particularly in today's day and age, and even earlier today, looking at legalizing marijuana and other substances, but yet on the other hand, we're fighting such a losing battle with opioids. You know, how do we reconcile that? You know, we put our officers out there, put them in harm's way, trying to identify drug dealers and people that are moving illicit substances around. We try to get them out there to make those arrests and bring people to justice and maybe get rid of those substances from the general population. But we just hit the tip of the iceberg. A lot of the stuff that happens we don't even see, we don't know about. So I guess to answer your question, we're not really winning the war on drugs. Maybe we have to win the war on supply and attitudes and you know, changing people's behaviors. And I don't know that we have the ability to do that in law enforcement. We have very few tools at our disposal. They're really just, you know, identify the bad guy, go out and arrest him. Kind of like what you just described you were doing in the late 80s, early 90s. So I'll maybe throw it over to Detective Emery, because he's really the one that, you know, when the boots are on the ground, they're out there doing the work every day, and they're identifying people that do have, you know, drugs on them and making arrests.
Well, before you take that, I know for a fact that it's done differently because I know you've been involved with it. I know that there was very little concern for what we would call informants back in the day, that their continued use was our continued pipeline. But I know that's not the way you look at it because I've had firsthand experience with it. So maybe you could elaborate on that just a little bit.
I mean, with that aspect, obviously, law enforcement's tools to fight this, our resources are limited and our assets are limited. I mean, I can have a college degree or all these law enforcement classes, but for me to go out and buy drugs, can I do it? Yeah, but it's not really going to happen. So the bottom line is you use informants. Either you're paying them or you're trying to get them some sort of court consideration, and it's no secret. If you offer them money to buy it, you know what they're going to do with that money. It's kind of a twisted game. You gain their trust, you try to do something with them, and you're there to help them, but it's like sending an alcoholic back to a bar when he's starting to recover it. So, like, you're expending one person, almost like a pawn, you feel guilty about it, to get one other person or maybe another group of people that something may or may not happen to in the long run, and you're constantly trading up, and you don't necessarily get anywhere. Sometimes I think what you're saying, even when I started, that was saying, find the guy, arrest the guy, get the person, arrest the guy. It might be better for us if we can find, like, eliminate these informants from using drugs, so that's, one less person who's buying, as opposed to one less person who gets arrested and maybe ends up back up in the streets.
Can I jump in?
Yeah, please do.
First of all, as someone that was fresh into that addiction and looking for help, for it to come from the police station, the most unlikeliest of sources that we thought we were going to go to, we were immediately thinking hospital, thinking of, maybe some public service that would come out and help us. It was the police. It was when we saw Chief Campanella speak and talk about them being part of the answer. So the tools that I think you have, sometimes you have that tool and you don't know. When I met with the chief and they heard Campanella speak and they took the time that they didn't need to take, and we went up to Gloucester with 13 people from this area. And just to give you an insight on what's happened to Groton in the meantime, we have a meeting here every third Wednesday of every month. And we had a gentleman that he called me, he was desperate, he wanted to come to our meeting. I said it's 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and he was scrambled a little bit and forgot what I said, and drove into Groton, and there was a police officer on the side of the road, and he knocked on the guy's window, which can be frightening for a police officer because you're not sure why someone's knocking on your window. And the police officer asked him what he wanted. He said, where's the Community Speaks Out meeting tonight? And the police officer said, I'm sorry, I can't help you. I don't know. And he jumped in his car and drove to another gas station. He's fumbling around with his phone, and he gets someone tapping on his window. He rolls his window down. It's that same police officer who called back to headquarters and said, it's at 6 o'clock to 8 o'clock, and it's right down the street. You go down here, take a left. Gave him directions. And in that meeting, when he came in and found it and told me that story, I knew Groton was moving in the right direction. I knew that already. So you guys do have that power. Us doing roll calls and speaking with the police officers, I think, has been very helpful. But really, to have that happen in your town, to me, signified that there's a change, there's a wave. And it's not happening in all towns, but I think, hopefully we model our group. And I tell them, what did I do first? They ask me. I would say, go to your police chief, which would be the opposite thing of what you would normally think when you have someone that's addicted to drugs. You're thinking they're going to they got the hammer, but they can help you in ways that we had no idea. And it's been one of our most effective tools, I think.
I have to say, too, in one regard, we've kind of changed the way we've looked at things. Unlike just trying to make an arrest every time, and we recognize the fact that usually the ones that Detective Emery and some of his counterparts are dealing with they're not really the problem. They have a problem, and maybe getting them help is a better solution. But where we really want to target our efforts is at the people that are preying on them, selling them illicit substances or assisting them in not recovering and going down this path. Those are the people that we're really after. The ones that don't have an addiction problem themselves but are doing this as a criminal enterprise and branching out into other avenues. Those are the real pariahs of society, not the people that are really in the throes of addiction and trying to overcome this challenge that they've got. So I think maybe that way we've looked at it a little bit different. And I know I've certainly gotten an education as a relatively new police chief in the last few years on how we need to do things a little bit better and what we really can do to help people, which is supposed to be our goal, right?
And you guys have done that.
Anybody have anything else to add for that one? Okay. Prevention. We'll talk a little bit about prevention now. Christa, you look like you would have been of the age that you had a DARE class at some point. I didn't. I was well before DARE, but a lot of the people that are struggling with addiction now came up through the Just Say No and the DARE program. And I know that when we do programs in schools now, and it's not DARE, it is kind of in-your-face programs in school, the kids come up afterwards and they say, geez, I wish somebody would have talked to me like this a long time ago. And I ask them about their DARE experience. And one of the things they say is, well, I loved my DARE officer, and there's great value in having police officers in schools on campuses. It builds relationships. But he says, but they would always say, I remember a lot about him. I remember his dog. He talked about his dog all the time, or what his favorite food was, or his favorite color, but I really don't remember much of what he was trying to teach me about drugs. So where do we go from Just Say No and DARE program, what does prevention look like now, or what should it look like? Or what would it look like if resources were not an obstacle? Maybe you want to kick that one off.
Sure. So I do want to say that we do still have DARE in the schools. I think in the town we have it in the 5th grade, and in the city we have it in the 5th and the 7th grade. And over time, they've had an opportunity to revamp that program to make it a little bit more evidence-based and to also add in some more protective factors, building protective factors within youth. So while there are some substance related content, there's also discussion about character building and problem solving and some leadership skills, refusal skills, things like that, which I think are pretty positive. But at the end of the day, any prevention curriculum should be evidence-based, and prevention should be comprehensive. There are a lot of different things we really want to bring into schools and bring into the community to make sure we're reaching kids and parents. So it's important that we, look at many different things, including, community forums. Certainly those have had a big impact. One thing that we have brought into the middle school recently here in Groton is the life skills curriculum. And that is a very well thought of program, and it helps build protective factors within youth. So once again, there is some substance specific content, but there's a lot of other things that they do talk about, everything from self-esteem to leadership. These are all really important things when we talk about trying to make youth resilient to drugs.
Chris, if you don't mind me asking, what your experience with drug prevention and drug prevention programs, and as you reflect now, what would you have liked to have seen?
Yeah, so when I started speaking for Community Speaks Out and Shine a Light on Heroin, the original talks that we would do would be at night like this. And it was actually a little while before I went into my first school. And I'm big on writing. I always feel like my writing skills are stronger than my speaking skills. So I spent a lot of time before I went into that first school assembly writing. I wanted to capture, I felt like my sole purpose in speaking to the students was to get some sort of prevention message across. So I spent a lot of time sort of coming up with, I did have DARE, and it obviously did not work for me, because if it did, I wouldn't be sitting here right now. DARE is obviously very informative. It's great in that aspect, but they tell you that drugs are bad, and that everything else that they say sort of stems from that initial, drugs are bad, they're terrible, they're bad. And as a kid, you understand that, but if you are that kid, which so many kids are, going to try that one sip of alcohol, I don't think we can expect that kids, teens are not going to have that one sip of alcohol. And for the kids that have a propensity for addiction, that one sip of alcohol is going to be drastically different for them than for the kid who does not have, heredity, mental health issues, any of the numerous factors that would sort of gear you towards struggling with addiction. It's going to look very different for those two kids. So DARE is sort of geared around the fact that we're going to tell you drugs are bad, and then that way you won't take them. But they don't go the next step, which is if you do take them and then, this Christmas tree lights up in your head after that first sip of alcohol, then what do you do? So to sort of bring it back was what I wanted to tell the kids, what I think my only real prevention message can be, because I can only really talk about my own personal experience, is I think if somebody had really explained what addiction was, and I think the way we do it when we go into schools and we have people in recovery speak is one way to do that. If somebody had really explained to me, not just drugs are bad and drugs will ruin your life in this abstract sort of way, but what addiction is. So for me, addiction is, I spent from 13 to say 23, that was, the period of time where I drank and, used drugs the most. So by sort of giving in to that first temptation and then going along with the wave of addiction for those years that are very important for the developing adolescent brain, for those 10 years, I gave up. Just say, I'm 30-something now, say I live to be 90-something. I now have 60 years of every single day having to put some sort of effort into my recovery. And when I talk to the kids, I say, like, literally every single day. And not just every day on, like the normal going to work days, but, it's family weddings and normal, all the things in life that people just sort of take for granted. I always have to be vigilant, as anyone in recovery does. I have to make sure somebody doesn't hand me a drink by accident. I have to make sure I don't put myself in a bad situation. I have to make sure I stay away from cravings. And I'm going to have to do that for the next 60 years. So if somebody had really explained that to me, somebody that had gone through it and said, I'm living this now, I'm now having to put effort into something in addition to all the other things you have to do in life, work, pay the bills, family, friends, it's like another job. So would that really be worth trying drugs or alcohol in those initial adolescent years? And I don't know, I think maybe that would have been something I would have at least listened to.
Thank you, Christa. Oh, go ahead, Joe.
I was going to say the face. Everyone says, "What's the face of addiction?" We've been to all these different groups, and they'll tell you to look around, look at each other, look at this person, look at your kid, and that's the face. I will ask you, what's the face of prevention? It's the same. It's the same theory. You look around, and every single person in this room that's going to learn a little bit tonight, maybe something they didn't know from this panel, or maybe you speak with someone outside and you learn something. We prevent by telling our stories. Human beings, I think, learn traditionally through storytelling. The most effective prevention message I've ever seen is when we bring someone that looks a lot like they look like the kids that they're talking to. Like, I think when I first met you and you first got on stage, Christa, and spoke in front of Stonington, she looked so young. She was older than the kids that you're speaking to, but you can see them because they understand that they're hearing a story from someone that's believable. And oftentimes the drug prevention programs, even when I was in school, came from that 50 or 60-year-old person that said, I drank when I was in my 20s and it wasn't good. And we believe them about as much as we did our parents. But to see, and it's just the way it is. Nobody, and as a person that coached a lot of different sports, and I know the feeling of, a parent will hand you their kid, and I'm coaching baseball, and I'll tell them something, and they will listen. And the parent goes, why don't they listen to me? I said, because your name's not Coach. Your name's Mom or Dad. Why do they listen to kids that look like them? Because they're believable, because they're their peers. And the fact that we kind of don't want to expose our kids sometimes by saying, I don't want that kid that was drug addicted saying things that they've done. I mean, we have folks that, young women that the stories over and over again, and I hate to talk about it, but there's probably 2 or 3 young girls in right now that are being supplied with drugs while people from Backpage are meeting up with them, having sex with them. Those are things, and those are folks that, in the stories, that our kids in junior high school will have to hear. Though when you hear a story like that and you're a junior high kid, or if you hear a story that you're about to go to college, and this one I talk to seniors in high schools a lot, because you're going to school, and we know some straight A students that never touched drugs before, not once. They go away, they get dropped off in August, and then they get picked up in January as full-blown heroin addicts. These people had everything going for them. And I remind them, if that senior comes up to you and says, try to sniff that line, I think you'll like it. And remember, that person may be in addiction. So this might be someone thinking, if I could get you addicted and you're a freshman, I know you have access to large amounts of money because you can call your mom or dad, and they'll pretty much give you anything because you're living our American dream. You're going to college and you're being successful. But I could dig my claws into you in 5 minutes if he sniffs that one line and it changes him. So to me, prevention is that. Prevention is me telling that senior that's getting ready to go to college that that's a possibility, and that is the outcome. Because we know that when your mom tells you not to touch that hot stove because it'll burn, you might get close. You may be the kid that touches it, and you might not ever cook again. But those are the ways that I think that we prevent people from doing things, is sharing. And we just don't do that. And unfortunately, this is the disease that is so shameful to share that it's festered and it's become the problem that we have now, because people are afraid, and it seems so wrong to be part of it at all. And once your kid is addicted, you are a bad parent, or everything that comes along with it. So I just say, keep speaking about it.
I think I'll give you 1 second, but you just touched on stigma, and that's not on my list of things here, but that is a barrier to both treatment and prevention. If we don't talk about it, if we don't want to believe it's real, if we won't share, I think Dr. Mallitz was at the first thing I did up in Killingly, where it came out of my mouth, and it just came out that my son was in recovery. I'd never said it before, but I'd done about 30 programs. And even I wasn't comfortable at first saying it. So stigma does get in the way of, I would have been a more effective speaker, I think, I think I am a more effective speaker after I shared. Chief, you had something to say?
Yeah, mine's more of a question for Christa. We, in law enforcement, we struggle with dare, right? Because I'm a fan of having a positive police interaction between police and youth. But as you heard here, we do it in 5th grade, sometimes in 7th grade. But trying to identify that target audience and give them the message that you're talking about. Your message isn't lost on me that, hey, getting someone like you that you could hear from and maybe relate to a little bit better may be a more effective approach that we can introduce. But what is that target audience? What age, at what point do we want to have that conversation? Because I do think DARE is now about making good decisions. It isn't just about say, don't do drugs, just say no. We think we've evolved a little bit more than that. But I didn't experience it growing up, so I wasn't taught DARE. And as a police officer, I never taught it myself. So my question to you is, what's a better approach, and what is that sweet spot we should be focusing our attention at to get the most benefit from it, or from a similar program?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with having the positive police interaction. I think that's great. And like I said, it was always informative, but it was just sort of a rather dry, these are the facts, and this is why it's bad. So maybe some sort of combination with a police officer and somebody in recovery. I also think it has to be consistent. It can't just be a one-time thing and then, oh, we'll repeat this again next year. I don't understand why it's not, like, we have a health class, why isn't there a substance abuse class? Or at least a significant part of a health class or a gym class that's devoted to ongoing substance abuse prevention. Because if the adults, if the parents, if the police officers are not making the statement that it's important enough to we take math every year. I'm 33 years old. I haven't used one single thing that I've learned in any high school math class ever. I do use my English, so thank you, Mr. Spellman, for that. But my math, no. But a drug prevention course would have helped me a hell of a lot. But it was sort of like being told that this is not as important as this.
Oh, great point. Great point.
Very good. One of the things that I wanted to try to touch on is treatment, and we want to be conscious of the time here. Access to treatment and the capacity for treatment have always been barriers to getting someone help, whether it's somebody you care about. I remember working the phone for 3 straight days. Or the type of treatment that's available, age appropriateness of treatment when you're talking about young people. It enraged me when I first got involved with this, where I'd see the Demas commissioner go on television and say there's treatment for everyone that wants it. And I knew that wasn't true because I just spent 3 days on the phone. Access, capacity, maybe this is a legislative part of this, but let's have some discussion around access and capacity.
Well, I think legislatively, it's always going to come down to budget. And we all know where the budget's gone, but I think a lot of the folks that we've helped, that there are beds and there are places to go and that are available. The access to treatment where we see the problem is the step therapy type of approach that we have for everything. And even if you have cancer today, This is changing up at the legislative level right now. If you walk in, they can test you and find out ahead of time which chemos would most likely work for you, or which ones wouldn't work for you. Currently, under our system right now, you still have to go through the steps. Chemo number 1, then chemo number 2, and then chemo number 3, even knowing the doctors would say, well, chemo 1 and 2 probably won't work for you after we tested your genome testing. With addiction, it's the same way. And if you go to get the help, you have to go to IOP first, maybe 2 or 3 times. You have to fail that to become eligible to go to a longer-term treatment. And again, sometimes that works for some people and sometimes it doesn't work for others. But I really think that step therapy is not working. The insurance company set that up, where we've had folks even where we sent them down to get to a detox center. The way that it works now is, we have to tell our folks that we send down there to lie to get into treatment, because if you buy a Suboxone on the street and you're on, say, heroin, and on the way down you take a Suboxone and you walk in and you're not of clear mind, and maybe we said don't say that you took anything, because the minute you say that you took a Suboxone to a nurse that's in a detox facility, they have to tell you that they cannot help you. And the only way for you to actually gain access to this facility again is if you actually physically go outside the door and use heroin or another on-street drug that's not considered a detoxing drug. Those are the type of step that I think that we should avoid. I mean, if that person goes outside and gets one of the tainted batches of heroin, and they won't say they say that. There's not a detox facility on the planet that's going to say that oh no, we told them to go out and use it and come back in. But that's the way that we get paid in this country too, because if you're a detox facility and somebody walks into your facility and they're already using detox medicine, you can't get paid now. So those are the types of things legislatively I think we can do to get the help. The bed problem, I think opening up Stonington in our neck of the woods has been helpful. We've struggled. I see my wife, and I know Linda, has been on the phone for days begging people for beds. So to hear that it's open and accessible to everybody, I think is disheartening sometimes, especially if you're the parent that's trying to find the help that that you can't get. And we're working on that legislatively. I think there's been a couple bills, but again, it's putting your money where your mouth is. That's where it ends up being.
Anybody have anything to add to this? I will say, having criticized Demas, since they acknowledged that they were pretty good at the mental health part and not so good at the addiction part, they have done better. Demas has come a long way in recognizing their shortfalls, and I will give them credit where credit is due. It has gotten better. So we get about 5 minutes before we open for questions. So one of the things I wanted to talk about was harm reduction. Narcan. Believe it or not every police department in this area is carrying Narcan yet. We've had some struggles. We've actually provided Groton Town some of their Narcan. Community Speaks Out. There's a place for it with the private citizens as well. And maybe, I don't know who's best to talk about this. Maybe,
I would.
Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'm sure Christa probably would chime in, but if you're looking at the Narcan and some of the press that surrounds it, there's a lot of folks that are on the negative side saying, well, people are putting Narcan in the middle of the table and people are using it, and then they can Narcan themselves to safety, and it's becoming this almost like a blanket of protection that people are using, and we don't see it that way. Obviously, we're so happy that our police are carrying it. We have a story of a young girl that our group actually does trainings for Narcan. Alan Salzerman's he's a qualified trainer, and he was going out training folks. And we had a young lady that actually needed to be Narcan, didn't tell her parents, just went home because she's 18, so the parents didn't know. And when we found out she was Narcan through our sources, we called the parents and let them know. And we sent Alan over to teach the parents how to use it. 2 weeks later, the parents had to use it. They were able to save their daughter. And basically, with that Narcan kit, if they hadn't been trained in it, she wouldn't be here today, and she wouldn't be almost a year clean, the head of a house in California, going to meetings and helping other folks get the help that they need. So I say you just keep saving people until we run out of Narcan, and hopefully we never do that. But I think that's the point. We have something that's available. Just like if I have an allergy, I'm allergic to apples. hopefully they don't say, well, he's a dummy, he ate those apples, he knew he was allergic, why should we inject him with anything? You know, we have to keep doing it. And I think most people know that, but you do see some pretty harsh comments online and underneath some of those articles about why should we save this person or why shouldn't we. For humanity, we should. And if you see the amount of folks that we have lost, 63,000 people. And again, I'm a budget guy. I'm in the legislation, and losing 63,000 people that we've trained how to read English, how to do math that you hate so much, I guess, how to go through school, become successful, and and be a U.S. citizen, and then to let them fade away seems like a very bad judgment call. And we just save them, and then we go from there. So I am a huge fan in Narcan, and hopefully we can expand that to every police department in the state, because it really is the right thing to do.
You have anything to add? Okay. I'll touch on one thing, sober living. It's acknowledged as being a very important part of recovery. It's that transition into real life where you're not engaged in a program 24/7 anymore. You got to go back into the real world. And having something like this is important. At the same time, it's where some of the biggest abuses occur when the intentions of the people operating the sober residences are not pure, are not for the right reasons, and are not providing what is needed. It can be the absolute best place for somebody in recovery at that point in their life, but it can also be the absolute worst place for somebody recovering if it's a bad one. So there's a big problem too with not in my backyard when it comes to sober living, and I would certainly hope that if you happen to end up with one opening up in your community, you take the time to find out which one that it is. Is it one of the bad ones? If so, I'm all for you. You want to fight the bad one from opening up near you? I'm with you. If it's one of the good ones, I want you to take the time, please, to get to know the people that are in the house, get to know the people that are running it before. We had a little not in your backyard problem in New London, and part of what solved that problem was letting the young ladies that lived in the house meet the people that didn't want them there. And when the young lady said, "I know you don't want me there," and they said, "No, honey, it's not you," things started to change. So I will tell you that about sober living. We just scratch the surface here. There is so much to talk about. There is so many other aspects to this. And really what it's supposed to do is to give you something to chew on, to give you a spark that makes you want to go out and learn more. And there's tons of ways to learn more. There's books in the back that the Groton Public Library has made available to check out, donated by GASP, I think, most of them. There are organizations out there willing to help. And I don't want to finish this without saying, listen, we made it sound like a huge problem, and we didn't offer a lot of answers and solutions here tonight, but there are people that can help. And we didn't really talk about Community Speaks Out much. Myself, Joe, and Carolyn, and Christa are all on the board of Community Speaks Out. And Community Speaks Out is just peer support. Basically, that's what it is. It's people that have had, by now, tons and tons of experience navigating the system. Tons and tons of experience, both personal, but also in the help of others, trying to get people down that path or start them and then hold their hand through it. And you can take advantage of the experience, of the relationships that we've made with providers to try to get this done. So Community Speaks Out is there for anybody and everybody. I don't know, I'm not the main person that gets called. When the ladies ask me to do something, I do something. But Linda, Lisa, and Tammy are on the phone, and Joe are on the phone constantly helping. And it helps to have somebody that understands what you're talking about. So I want to kind of, before we open it up to the floor, say that help is out there, and if we don't have an answer, we'll get it for you. If you need somebody that's professional and clinical, we will hook you up with that professional and clinical person. We don't claim to be anything but a bridge to that.